This conference will now be recorded.
Uh,
I only see a James Scales on there. I don't know if that's your first person or not.
no. Oh, well, let's open up this meeting. This is, hello, everybody. This is the October
26.
26th meeting of the Monterey Select Board. Um, Present is myself, Stephen Weiss, Chair. Justin Lee Cook.
John Weingold remotely.
Okay, so the three of us are here. The purpose of this meeting essentially is to interview individuals or groups to perform investigations of certain activities that have gone on in the town hall and in Monterey in general. It's strictly right now to talk to each one of these people that would like to work for the town of Monterey. It's not to discuss the investigations in any kind of detail. We're gonna try to avoid using the names of individuals if possible, because there are a certain amount of rules that pertain to prior notice. So we're just right now gonna talk about basically these individuals and how they can use their professional acumen to the benefit of Monterey. At 6 p.m. we have scheduled an interview with, and I apologize if I mispronounce anybody's names, Paul Italian and Ed Culver. Are they here? Are you present? I can't see you, so you're gonna have to speak up. No?
There's nobody named that.
Is there?
There's a James Scales, a Don Coburn, and Peter.
No, no, we have a 6 p.m. Now, the thing about Zoom is you can't blame it on traffic. Well, actually, maybe you could blame it on traffic getting to your house. Well, this is scheduled for 6 p.m., so we're gonna wait until these folks show up because they're on the board to be interviewed. The interviews were scheduled by Justin, right?
Yeah.
Yep, and you confirmed that you have 6:20 and 6:40.
Oh, there he is.
Here he is.
Okay, great. Hi, Paul.
Hi, good evening. I was sitting on the screen. I didn't realize I didn't click the right button. Sorry for the delay.
No problem. Are you interviewing alone or with Ed?
I saw Ed's name on the agenda, but I didn't realize that him and I were supposed to be interviewing together.
No, that's fine. I think you had just mentioned, and Brian mentioned that you may work together. Is that the case?
Can you hear?
Yes,
Can you hear Justin?
I do work with Ed. Yes.
Okay, but it's just you for the interview today, which is fine.
Okay, great. So welcome. You have all three members of the select board here. Again, I just in my brief opening remarks, I just asked everybody just to basically not talk about anything specifically. Obviously, we're going to talk about how you approach investigations, or how you, Ed, would approach investigations. Can I do the first question that I have, and Justin, feel free, or John, feel free to jump in. So so just give a little brief background to your experience.
Certainly. I retired from I retired from the Mass State Police in 2015 after serving 27 years in positions of increasing responsibility. Since my retirement, I've become a private investigator here in Massachusetts, and over the last handful of years, I've had the pleasure of working with KP Law in a number of different investigations. Initially, it started out as a good part of my background in the Mass State Police had to do with internal affairs investigations and standards and training, issues on the department. So I started out with primarily police investigations, and then as time went along, it was fire departments and DPW employees, and a couple of allegations had been made against town administrators, and a lot of EMS stuff. So as the last few years have gone by, I've really got a very good understanding of how municipal government works. Coming from the state police, I really didn't have much background as far as the roles and responsibilities of a town administrator and how they run their departments and oversee all of the municipal departments from one side of the town to the other. So from the standpoint of my way of doing investigations, certainly I start with the complainant, whoever that may be. Usually there's something in writing, interview that person. And then I delve right into the existing rules, regulations, or any type of an employee handbook that the municipality has to determine whether or not, some allegations of misconduct that line up with existing policies, are potentially going to be found to have occurred. And with that, I just go wherever the investigation leads me, a review of documents, interview of witnesses, and then ultimately coming down to the person who has been accused of misconduct to afford that person the opportunity to respond to the allegations made against him or her. And once the investigation is completed, again, I'd write a report with findings in accordance with the existing policies, whether or not the policies had been violated. I've written various reports. I've testified before municipal boards with my summary of my investigations, any findings and recommendations I may make. So I bring to the table, I'm an unbiased investigator. I've never been to Monterey before. I may have been down to Stockbridge with my wife to the Norman Rockwell Museum, but other than that, I've never been out that neck of the state. My assignment never brought me out that way. And again, I would come into the town there with no bias. I don't know any of the people. I don't frankly know what the complaint even is at this point. I have been on the town website, so I know the name of the town administrator as well as the town select board, members, but I've never had any dealings with the police department out there. So again, I just bring my experience as an unbiased investigator, do a complete and thorough investigation in accordance with the existing policies, and write a report of my findings. So that in a nutshell is what I have to offer if you chose me as your investigator.
Down, you physically come down for these investigations, or do them through?
Prior to COVID, I always try to do all of my investigation, my interviews in person. Since COVID occurred, I started to use Zoom or GoToMeetings or Google Meetings more often for witness interviews. But I would still recommend that the person who's making the complaint, I do an interview with them in person, and certainly the person who is the accused, again, afford them an opportunity to respond to all the allegations. And I think at the very minimum, those two people, the chief complainant as well as the person being accused, would be in-person interviews. If it made better sense for me to travel out there, I did do a number of investigations, not quite as far out as where you are, but out in Western Mass. And I do what I call marathon days. Just try to line everybody up, starting from 8 a.m. to whatever p.m., get them done. And if I have to stay overnight in a hotel, I've done that before as well. So again, every investigation is different, and there's various options of how to do the interviews.
Okay. And it's this may be multiple claims from multiple people. Have you had experience on that?
Certainly, yep. I've had various.
Okay.
Oftentimes you start with one complainant, and then as you talk to the complainant, the chief complainant, you find out that there's different people that have either.
Excuse me. Time out. Pardon me. We're getting a lot of feedback from the open mics. So can we just close the mics? Because I'm getting static. I can barely understand what he's saying. So we need to close the mics and let him speak because we're getting feedback from everybody's mic.
So the only mic that's open is yours, so before you speak, you're gonna have to let me,
So
everybody else is on mute.
everybody else is on mute. So is this better, John? No, I can't. Now I can't.
He's muted and he's talking, so I can't tell you what he's saying.
Okay, so everybody's now muted except for myself.
And Mr. tell you.
And Paul, if you don't mind me calling you Paul, do you?
No, not at all. Please do.
Steve, you can call us by, we're pretty casual around here. Okay, so, I'm sorry, you were interrupted. It was, you were saying about, multiple investigations and multiple people.
Certainly, it's not uncommon to have a complaint filed and then there's
So it
precipient
apparently.
witnesses that could add information. I'm not sure if the mic is my problem, but I just started to say that it's very common that you interview somebody and then you either interview other witnesses that have the same type of complaints against the person, or at the very minimum, they would be precipient witnesses to the allegations.
So, Paul, Justin here, thanks for coming in. If you do become aware of issues beyond the initial agreed upon scope of the investigation, how do you deal with those? Do you let the select board know of those issues, or do you just provide them in the end report, or how does that work?
No, one of the first questions I would have if I was selected as the investigator was essentially, what's the investigative directive? What scope are you looking for me to address? What are you looking for me to look into? And as more information came forth, again, whoever the point of contact would be, whether it be the town council or the board of selectmen, I would bring that information forth to that person and say, I'm hearing more information regarding wrongdoings. Would you wish me to proceed? But generally, I start with just an investigative directive narrowly related to a particular topic and see where it goes from there.
It's my understanding that the scope of your employment will be determined in an executive session.
Okay.
Good.
So actually, I think we would want a general, some sort of written document that basically addresses how you would approach, if there are multiple, if you go beyond the scope or what have you. I'm also interested personally, and I believe the other members are, on how this, how do you build this type of activity? Is it by the hour, by the job? Do you give an estimate with some sort of addendum that if the board sees fit, we continue the investigation?
Yes, I generally drop a letter of agreement with the client, and I would do an hourly rate to include any expenses. I record all of my interviews, and I have a vendor that transcribes it, so I have 100% accuracy, and I don't inflate that cost at all. So whatever I spend from my account with the vendor for a transcript, I just pass that along to the client. But I would also oftentimes we'll have a ceiling per se where the client only wants to spend X amount, and the word of the agreement says something along the lines of, to be spent X amount of, not to exceed X amount of money without prior approval. So again, if we're believing we're going to stay within that dollar figure, and then something comes up that the select board or whomever determines it needs to be investigated, we'd have a discussion and again amend the letter of agreement. But generally, I do have clients that put a cap on the number. They only want to spend X amount of money, and then we proceed from there. And again, if we have to go past that number, there'll be a discussion first.
So, Paul, another question. It sounds like you mostly will report to us on findings related to town policies, maybe an employee handbook. Will you make any findings related to state or federal law, or would we rely on the lawyers for those types of findings?
Yeah, my investigations are primarily related to existing policies and handbooks and things like that. From the standpoint of violation of any laws, if I came across anything, and I'm not even sure what you may be talking about, but if I came across anything that I believe may be a criminal offense, I would make recommendations that it's referred to the DA's office. I'm not a law enforcement agent, and if I start talking as an agent of the town about a potential criminal investigation, that person would probably have some rights that I wouldn't have the authority to be exercised. And so I would make recommendations that be referred to the DA's office if I came across something that I believe could possibly be criminal in nature.
So once you've seen the scope of your employment, can you give us, you'll be able to give us an estimate?
I'm sorry, Mr. Weingold, I missed that. I just got all you said was once I have the scope of the investigation, could I give what? I'm sorry.
You can give us an estimate of the time and, from interviews to report. I mean, once you've seen the scope, you can give us that, right?
I could give an estimate, but again, I would leave it open-ended to ensure that if something, really ballooned at the other end, we'd have an opportunity to discuss further funding.
Okay.
But
Do you have a set hourly rate?
My hourly rate is $125.
I only have one more question. You said that you don't know anybody here in the town of Monterey. Have you been contacted by anybody in the town of Monterey other than Justin?
No, I have not. I spoke to town council Brian Mazer initially, and other than the email to set up this meeting, that's the only point of contact that I've had with anybody from Monterey.
Another question, Paul.
Bless you.
For your interviews, are they usually one person at a time, or sometimes will you interview a group of people? How do those work?
No, always one person at a time. Unless there's some very, very extenuating circumstances like a minor or somebody who's hearing impaired or something like that. But 99% of the time it's one-on-one interviews.
How long do you anticipate, I know you don't know the scope, but how long do you anticipate the, interviews to report to be, roughly?
I don't have a crazy busy schedule right now. And realistically, depending on the number of interviews, the vendor that I have gives me a really quick turnaround on the transcripts. I get right through them. And again, whatever the scope is, I assure you it's a reasonable time frame. It's never been anything like 6 months or anything, unless it's very, very, very long going investigation. I try to turn around in a very reasonable time frame.
Okay.
And again, this isn't something that would go to the bottom of my caseload and I get to you in 3 months. It would be something I could start relatively quick. And again, because of the drive, my preference would be to, there may be a delay in lining up 2 or 3 people on the same day rather than driving back and forth. My preference would be to get out there and do as much as I could in one day just to, manage my time and manage your budget.
Right. Do you charge the same time for travel? Same hourly?
I'm flexible with that one. There's going to be some travel time, but if I'm stuck in the Mass Turnpike for 3 hours in traffic, I'm not gonna hit you with that one. Sometimes I'll decide last minute that I'll stay overnight in a hotel, and it kind of balances itself out. Instead of charging you an hour of travel time, it's an hour for an overnight stay, and it balances out when it's that long of a ride. But the answer is I charge for the miles, and there is some travel time, but not to the point that it's going to be unreasonable.
Okay.
Oh, I don't have any other questions. Justin, you have any questions?
I'm all set. Thank you, Paul, for joining us for an interview.
Thank you, Paul.
Yes, thank you very much.
I have one last question, sorry to keep you. If, let's say, during the course of your interview, we decide as a select board to have you give us recommendations for some interim actions to be taken. Have you done that type of thing before?
From the standpoint of like what the sanction would be?
No, yeah. If something develops during the course of your interview, and and we give you the scope that you should maybe make a recommendation after you've gathered the evidence and before you write your report, is that something you've done in the past?
Well, again, what I usually do is just say whether or not any policies or handbook rules have been violated, and generally, my strongest recommendation is it's got to be in line with progressive discipline. I mean, if it's a first offense for some violation of policy, that's going to have to be a town decision of what the penalty would be versus a fifth offense. So again, my findings just recommend whether or not there's been a violation of policies or existing rules.
It's my understanding that investigation, that these are, that we're looking for, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, that we're looking for a pure investigation, somebody from outside, a third party to look at things. You don't consider yourself a mediator or a human resource person, do you?
No, I don't. I conduct a fact-based investigation. I'm not a mediator or a HR person.
Okay, yeah, we want to use your talents. Um, Can I, one last thing, so for these towns, when you transition from working for the, from the state police, to working, doing investigations in these towns, how long have you been doing the investigations in these towns? I mean, has it been, I know you said 2015, but has it been, was it, has it been the last 5 years or the last 3 years?
Yeah, last 5 years. I retired from the state police in January. It was actually January 2016, but the end of 2015 was when I stopped working. And the spring of 2016, I got my license, PI license in I think March of 2016, and shortly after that, I began doing the cases. So it's been over 5 years.
Great.
The next person.
I've been, is that, are you okay, Justin?
I'm all set, thanks.
John, are you okay? Have any questions? He's all right. Paul, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us here in the town of Monterey. And
Thank you.
for your very concise answers. We like that. So we're going to move on to our next candidate.
Wait a minute. May I ask Paul a question too?
Sure.
Go ahead, Don.
Paul, your interviews involve your evaluation of credibility, correct?
Yes.
So when you make your recommendation to the board as to what you found, isn't the board itself going to have to hear from these witnesses and from you and make its own mind up as to who it believes as to each thing?
My report would entail a credibility of assessment for each person, and generally, when I'm called to an executive session, I would provide a summary of my investigation and whether or not they decide to call the witnesses before them. That would be entirely up to the board.
Thank you.
I think we're good.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go on to Mr. Alan Gould. All right, Alan, are you there? Yes, you're there. Okay. So have you, Alan, have you been on during these questions of the last division?
For like 2 minutes.
I think the last two questions, yes, we came in, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can hear you fine.
Okay, yeah, I came in at, I think it was 6:18. Always got to be a little early for our assigned time.
Early is good. So let me start with ask you the same question that I asked previous individual. Could you give us a general idea of your experience and how you approach investigation?
Sure. So MRI has been in business for almost 35 years now. We have a very strong, I call it the police group, among other things. And they oversee most of our investigations. So my background is 30 years in police service and then town administration. So our whole business is founded on managing local government. And we just happen to do an awful lot of organizational studies and internal investigations, all for, we don't do any private work. It's all public sector. It's all local government.
Okay, you mentioned, well, I'm sorry, MRI?
Municipal Resources Inc. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize it was a company. So, but you yourself specifically as an investigator? Within the company, are you going to be using the resources of the company, or is it just going to be you? Who's going to be doing the investigations?
I would assign somebody to that. I asked Sean Kelly, who's also on the screen there. He's our director of services. I asked him to join me. His background is in investigations as well, with a career in police work, all at local government level. So between the two of us, there's an awful lot of background noise. I'm having some trouble. But yeah, so we have a team of people to do these things, and it's a matter of us matching up the right person for the given assignment.
Oh, okay, so there's, all right, so there's nobody essentially, so first you do an analysis and then you decide who in the company would be appropriate to do the investigation.
Well, if we're engaged for this, we need to find out from somebody. I mean, I've done a certain amount of review, so I think I understand from Selectmen's minutes kind of what the issue is very generally. But we like to confirm that with the client. We like to see what it is that we're actually investigating, rather than what I would read off of your minutes. And then at that point, we'd kind of pick who the best person would be to do that work. Anybody that was doing the work is an employee of MRI. It's a handful of four of us that would be involved in the work. I manage all of our investigations, and Sean directly supervises them. I would say there's a very high probability that Sean would be boots on the ground on this one. He'd likely be doing the investigation himself.
Will the interviews be in person or remote?
We would try to do them in person. So our view with most of these, and we do this all over New England, would be to schedule the appointments, come down, spend a day there, probably spend an overnight, follow up the next day, and then come back, start to write things up, and then do any follow up necessary by email, by phone, or by teleconference if there was any follow up required.
All right.
And
What's the hourly rate?
$135 an hour.
Okay. And travel time billed at the same time or different?
Again, a lot of feedback. I think you asked about travel time. We bill that at half the hourly rate after the first hour round trip, and mileage at the IRS rate after the first 30 miles round trip. So, if a client is a distance away, it's more economical for us to stay overnight than it is to charge the back and forth.
and then at the conclusion of your investigation, you provide a report, I'm assuming?
Yes, there's a report with findings with the backup supporting material. Most of our interviews are tape recorded. We keep those on file in case they're needed. But yeah, there's findings, and if we're engaged to do so, we'll make recommendations.
Okay. Justin, do you have any questions?
Can you give us a time frame as to, interviews and completion of the report? I mean, in general, without seeing the scope of employment at this point?
It's a little tough, and Sean, correct me if I'm wrong. Likely we could get started down there within 2 weeks, probably.
And then when, on average, what would the project be completed by?
That's probably the hardest thing to determine without knowing the full
Yeah.
scope, because we don't know how many people we'd be talking to. Sometimes you start to unthread things a little bit, and you have to chase those rabbits down the holes. In something like this, you're spending good money. We don't want to leave too many stones unturned. We want to make sure that we're thorough and that we can answer all the questions at the end of the day. So, generally I'd say, 3 or 4 weeks. If everything, if people are responsive and we get cooperation, it shouldn't be a long duration.
Mhm.
What's your policy for requesting documents, I guess, if you have any trouble getting documents, like you said, if people are responsive?
Yeah, so, we usually, I mean, anybody that we'd be speaking to, well, most of the people we'd be speaking to would be employees of the town, or I suppose there could be an elected official. So in those cases with the employees, we ask that the Board of Selectmen, provide some written notice to the employees that might be involved that they're directed to cooperate with MRI. And if they fail to do that, then basically they're violating a directive from the Board of Selectmen. I think I can probably say, and
Alan,
Sean could agree with me, I'm not sure we've ever had that
or-
happen. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Alan, when you file a report with the town, is that a public document which is available to all citizens, or is that a confidential document?
That is totally up to the client. So we consider them absolutely confidential. But it is our product is the property of the client once we turn it over to them. So, various towns and cities have different policies. We've done some very, very serious internal investigations that have criminal implications that the town or council for the town has decided that they should be posted right away without redactions. And then we have others that will release a redacted report. That's not our decision. We write the reports. When we write a report, we understand that it is likely to be made public at some point or could possibly be made public at some point.
Yeah. Uh, just one other question. Your, have you had experience with, have you been here in Western Mass? Have you worked for towns in Western Massachusetts?
We have. I mean, we do a lot of recruitment work and a lot of organizational studies. Off the top of my head, I mean, I'd be glad to provide you with a complete client list. It's hundreds of clients. Um, but off the top of my head, I just can't think of where we've been out there anytime recently. Um, but I mean, we do investigations or organizational reviews all over. We've done them from Georgia to the Canadian border. But we're particularly focused on New England because we're all products of New England local government. That's what we know best. We run cities and towns as necessary, police departments, fire departments, whatever it is, and we just problem solve for them. So for generally, I don't release the names of clients for internals because that would imply that that they had a problem that needed work. But I can tell you that there Swampscott, within the last 6 months, we did a fairly substantial um, investigation there that's probably been made public. Seabrook, New Hampshire had a huge one that we did a number of years ago. I know that was made public, unredacted. So, I can't honestly tell you off the top of my head where they're public and where they're not. We consider them 100% confidential from our end.
Any in Berkshire County, just like a yes or no? I don't, you don't have to identify the towns.
I'm sure, actually, and off the top of my head, I just can't tell you where they are.
Right, no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, I'm just curious. Can I ask you the same question? What's that?
John Wengel's doorbell.
Really, okay. I'm gonna ask you the same question that I asked the previous person, just so that we're asking the same questions. Have you been contacted by anybody other than Mr. Maycook from the town of Monterey, or do you know anybody in the town of Monterey?
Don't know anybody, quite honestly, hadn't heard of it. um, so no, the only person I have in contact with was council.
Oh, didn't you contact them?
No, well, you asked besides.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry. All right. I have no other questions. Do you have any questions, Justin?
Alan, when you interview people, is that typically done, one person at a time, or are there circumstances where you interview multiple people at a time?
I can't think of a time where I would want to interview multiple people at a time. I think that what we
Good.
want to do is get information. We want people to be to be open, to be honest, to be unbiased when they speak with us. And I'm not sure that in most settings, we could be 100% sure that that was going to happen if it was in a group setting.
And do you issue a fact-finding report? Do you also relate the facts to town policies, state or federal laws?
Yes. So one of the first things we would do is ask for your personnel policies or your personnel plan. They're called different things by different people, so that we could understand what the rules are for your community. And then, at the end, as we start to determine what the findings might be, we compare what we found to what your rules are. So that's really important. And then, we also understand best practice. So all of those things kind of weigh in.
Thank you.
Terrific. I don't have any more questions. John, you have any questions? I can't.
Says no.
Nope. All right. Thank you, Alan. Appreciate you,
No.
and Sean. And we'll reach out. We need to reach out.
All right, super. Thank you very much, folks. Good luck.
Thank you.
Actually, I do have one question. Oh, well.
Don.
Well, I'll just comment on it. You've interviewed and you asked no questions of Mr. Kelly, the guy who's going to be doing the investigation. You know nothing about him.
As a former actor, I do enjoy getting notes. However, and you're right, Don. However, it seems that Mr. Gould was the spokesman for this MRI group. And I would suspect that Sean's answers would not be any different. But yes, we did miss an opportunity to determine his
Voice.
voice. There we go. Because Mickey's in charge of
You
that.
didn't have one.
Well,
The other person isn't on yet.
okay, so we have a 6:40 and we're 2 minutes ahead of time.
How many are you interviewing?
What?
How many are you interviewing?
Just one more. We had four.
You had four.
We had four. One person wrote and retracted their interest. And I guess maybe they were reading the minutes. And so we just had three.
Yeah, because I thought I saw four.
Yeah.
And then then.
Yeah. So we were able to juggle things to get a very, very concise use of our time. That's much to Justin's credit. So we'll just wait for Ms. Green. I hear a beep.
She is now on.
Okay,
We're just waiting for her to type in.
we'll wait for her to arrive. So is she officially arrived yet?
Yes.
Ms. Green, can you hear me?
She just muted herself.
Wait.
Maybe say it again. I'm not sure if she.
Ms. Green, do you hear me? Can you hear me? It's like the early days of wireless that I got to miss.
Good evening.
Can you hear
Can
me?
you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. Are you getting any feedback? Are you getting any static?
Great.
What? A little bit?
Hi, now I can hear you. Sorry about that.
No problem. Okay, welcome to the town of Monterey. Where technology begins with a small letter T. So we're going to try to. So thank you for agreeing for this interview. You've got two members of the select board here in town hall and one available remotely. We're just basically we're just gonna dive right in right now and just talk about a general scope of what kind of services that you provide and your general experience. So if you can avail us with that, I mean, what is your experience and how do you approach investigations?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me tonight. My name's Corinne Green. I'm a founding partner at Green and Hafer. We're an employment law boutique firm. Myself and my partner Suzanne, along with three other female attorneys that work part-time with us. And we work exclusively in employment law. We represent both plaintiffs and companies and organizations, nonprofits, and municipalities. I've been working in employment law for about 18 years now. This has been the exclusive area that I've worked in. And I engage in both counseling work, litigation work, and investigatory work. What I enjoy doing most is the type of work that helps resolve problems rather than exacerbates them. So oftentimes my practice is focused on taking cases in which we see an opportunity to try to bring resolution. The other part of our practice is investigations, and I've been doing a fair amount of work in the investigations most recently, most of the time for municipalities and also for small companies. I'm brought in either before a claim is brought or after a claim is brought. Normally what happens is the company or the organization or the municipality is put on notice of there being some personnel issues and some conflicts that may rise to the level of a potential claim. And so they have me come in early to try to understand what the dynamics are, assess the risk, and then just as importantly, make recommendations on how to either resolve the problem or try to bring the part, make decisions that will eliminate any risk moving forward. And, since COVID has hit, unfortunately, most of the time this needs to be done by Zoom. While I do prefer to meet face-to-face with individuals, I would say that because of COVID, we've all gained a lot of practice and experience in doing our work through Zoom and through video conferencing. And so it's a little less intimidating and scary now. And quite frankly, I think it's saving clients a lot of money because lawyers and professionals don't have to bill for their time for travel and that it's become a very efficient means, especially in doing investigations. So that's just a short summary of my experience and my work. I'm certainly happy to expand on any areas that you have further questions on, or if you have additional information you'd like from me.
When you do investigatory work, you do some fact finding, I imagine, and then would you relate those facts to town policies, best practice, state and federal law?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of fact finding. And then what I do is oftentimes an investigator is responsible for making credibility determinations and trying to assess who's most believable and try to really drill down on what likely occurred, if there is in fact a factual dispute about what occurred. The other thing is to really understand, even if the facts aren't in dispute, is to make assessments on, is this a violation of the organization's policies? And does this subject the company to potential risk if a legal matter is brought forward? I normally write a report in which I summarize the facts as they have been provided to me. And within that fact pattern, I provide my insight as to if there are certain facts that I do not find credible, or there are certain facts that lend me to making a finding in one direction or another. I then take those facts and I do an analysis to understand, to help the client to understand what those facts mean in a legal forum, or more importantly, whether or not it's a violation of the organization's policies, which can be a lower threshold and a lower standard than what the law requires. Because at the end of the day, for litigation purposes, you don't necessarily want a written report from me providing you with whether or not I think certain actions rise to a level of hostile work environment or a colorable claim of discrimination. Regardless of what my finding is, it's not necessarily helpful for you to have my legal conclusions in writing. So oftentimes my analysis and conclusions are based on what I make factual findings, and then I analyze those against the organization's policies. I then, if asked, I will make recommendations on what the next step should be or what changes should be made to either eliminate future concerns or risk, or to try to minimize what could be a potentially dangerous situation or an unattainable or unprofessional situation, in order to help everyone be able to move forward.
What rate do you bill out at?
I bill out at $3.50 an hour. However, I do understand that this is a smaller budget potentially in a smaller municipality. I have an of counsel attorney that has been doing a number of the different investigations with me, that I did notify her that I would be doing this interview, and she is open and available to helping me, and she's billed out at $2.25 an hour. And so to the extent that price is an issue, I certainly am happy to have her do as much or as little of the work as you would prefer from a financial perspective. I would be overseeing her work. I would not be double billing for both of us being on things, but I certainly would be overseeing and finalizing any reports.
I see you were hired by the town of Medford.
I was.
Was that an investigation, or was that to protect the town against a lawsuit? What can you
No,
say?
that was an investigation. I did 2 investigations there.
Okay.
I've also done, trying to think, I did Medford recently. I've been around the state a fair bit. I admittedly, right off the top of my head, I don't have the names, and quite honestly, it's probably better that I not, through this interview, talk about
Correct. Yeah.
all the other areas that have had investigations. But
You were also in Australia.
I
Lucky you.
was.
Lucky you.
I was very fortunate. My husband had a job opportunity there for 3 years, and didn't take much to get me to go along.
What would the time frame be for you to do an investigation for Monterey, or to start one?
Sure. So we could certainly start it right off. As far as how long it would take us, that depends a little bit on the availability of the witnesses, the extent of the investigation itself. But I'm usually able to kick in and work as needed to meet reasonable deadlines.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions?
If we agree upon a scope of the investigation and then other issues arise as you do interviews and do the investigation, how would you respond to that?
Sure. I would certainly reach out to whoever my contact is with the town and explain, what I'm finding and what my recommendations are, but ultimately it's up to you to determine the scope of my investigation. So I would certainly notify you of any additional issues and seek your approval before either expanding or contracting the scope of the investigation.
We have some members of the public that would like to ask a question.
Don.
Corinne, could you tell us about the name of the associate and the extent of her experience in this field?
Sure. So Michelle Walsh, known as she goes by Shelley. Shelley has been working with us probably 6 years now. Although I have to admit, with COVID, I seem to have been. I'm unable now to count back the years. That seems to be a missing year in my world right now. But somewhere in that 6 year range. Prior to working with us, she had gained a fair bit of experience at a large firm in Boston. And then she took a little bit of time off to help raise her family. And then she joined us and has been doing exclusively employment law, working both with organizations and individuals on all different types of employment matters. She has quite a bit of litigation experience, so she has a very good sense of level of risk, and has a very good sense for where a set of facts could go if the wrong moves are made. She's also an excellent writer.
Okay. Actually, I have a question. That and full disclosure, I did not ask this of the other two individuals that we interviewed, only because they were not from law firms. How does that work if you, because you're an investigator, but you're also a law firm? Does that exclude if something comes up that is actionable by, I'm not an attorney, so.
Sure.
But how do you maneuver that?
Sure. So oftentimes what's done is attorneys are often investigators. And what that means is you would not be involved in any litigation with either side, any of the individuals or the organization that's hired you to do the investigation. And so my role would be completely independent and neutral. What I can bring to the table is the experience of knowing where certain fact patterns go in litigation. And quite honestly, like I said at the onset, a lot of my work is really done around counseling as well and helping organizations stay out of trouble. And so the value that I can add is certainly in the report and through conversations after the investigation is on recommendations of how to move forward. Changes that need to be made or concerns that need to be addressed, or make sure that the organization is aware of moving forward.
I'm sorry, is this information considered, privileged to the count of the attorney-client privilege?
Sure. So oftentimes what's done is the outside counsel for the organization is actually the one that hires me. And that way I can have open and honest conversations with the outside counsel about the litigation risks. And that is all privileged because the outside counsel is actually my client.
Okay, thank you. And the other question is that I have asked the other two. Have you been contacted by anybody other than Mr. Maycook from the town of Monterey?
Have I been contacted by anyone at the time?
You or Shelley?
No.
Okay, this is a straight question. We're looking for completely third-party, individuals who have no contact with Monterey. So I've been asking that question of all the interviews.
Oh, yes. No, sorry. I wasn't sure if it was a trick question or if I should have been concerned. No, I have had no contact with anyone from Monterey.
No, it's not a setup question. Yeah, I've been asking the same question. I just want to make sure, again, just so that nobody else can say, well, listen, so-and-so has been talking to them.
Sure.
I do appreciate your information, your candor. Are there any other questions? No? All right, thank you very much. Hope it wasn't
Great.
painful.
Thank you for having me.
Okay.
Have a good night.
Okay, you too.
I'm going to leave the session, right? Is that okay?
Yeah. If you like. So I'm certainly open to having a discussion about this since we're meeting tomorrow, or or if the board wants to have actually on this out today. I don't know, are there any individuals that were interviewing on there?
No.
Always feels funny to talk about somebody when we're in the
Well,
room.
I think it would be, wise to, unless there's an objection to appoint tonight, since we just interviewed them and got any information we wanted from them and heard, what services they provide, that way we could, move along more sooner than later. I'd, you know, I thought, each of the candidates brought their own strengths. All three seemed like they would do a good job and could start, in a reasonable timeframe. But I didn't know if you and John had any preferences.
Oh, I thought you were going to state your.
Well, I think, I thought MRI seemed like, a good choice for our situation. And they said they could get started within 2 weeks. Being, an organization, like, they said they may have Sean Kelly run it, but depending on the scope of the investigation, they have a number of people to choose from, depending, on what it is. I thought Paul, provided really good answers to all the questions that we asked. And he works with KP Law on a regular basis, so that's a positive for him. But him being by himself or just with Ed, maybe doesn't have the same, same resources as MRI. One thing I did like about Paul, though, is that he is going to have all the interviews transcribed, which it didn't, MRI didn't say they would do that. Corinne seemed like, Green seemed like she, obviously, it is very professional and has done a lot of this work. I don't know what, the price seems, obviously quite a bit higher. I don't know, if we can justify that, even with the, other attorney, it's still, significantly more. But if the board, really prefers her, I think we, wanna get the best, don't wanna get the best result. So, I would be really open to any of them. I think my preference would be MRI and Alan Gould. After the interviews.
John, wanna weigh in?
Yeah, I like Paul's experience in being a, state police investigator, internal affairs. I mean, I think he will get at the credibility issue. I mean, he's probably interviewed, thousands of people. I think they probably all have, but I mean, yeah, the attorney was great. I mean, I've spoken to some of her colleagues, and it was all rave reviews. But the cost is prohibitive, and I think she's more of a plaintiff's. Sues corporations that violate all kinds of employment discrimination and that type of thing. So it's either Paul or MRI, but I'm favoring Paul at this point. I mean, they worked with KP Law. I think MRI has too, right? I mean, we got these names from KP Law, didn't we?
Yes, this is a list that Brian, sent us. Yeah, they have somewhat similar backgrounds, Alan and Paul having a history in police work, and similar hourly rates, Paul being a little bit lower.
Why don't we sleep on it, and then you can discuss it tomorrow.
So you wanna make a decision?
I think unless there's significant objection, I think we've had our, time to look at their websites and do our research, and now we've had time to interview them. And if the board would appoint someone this evening, we could go ahead and schedule executive session, to determine the scope of interviews. So I would, you know, I think, if, I thought Paul and Alan were both, uh, probably good choices, and I would, and it sounds like John prefers Paul, and Steve hasn't shared a preference, but I would make a motion to appoint, yeah, what's that?
Yeah, well, could I,
Yeah.
my 2 cents in? Listen, I enjoyed, I think Ms. Green's firm, sounds like they do it all. The concern is obviously that the rate that they charge is going to make, it's basically, it's double the rate of the other two investigators, so we will have half the amount of investigation time for the same amount of money. And obviously, we want to devote as much time to the investigations as possible. So I don't think, my concern with Paul was, that, I don't know, my concern with Paul was that, that he may or may not work, be available to work. I think he said did he say he had some difficulty with working right away or something like this?
Paul said actually that he's not crazy busy, and that it sounded like he would get right on it. It was
2 weeks.
MRI. One big difference that actually should probably be noted is that Paul said he would definitely interview and the respondent in person and probably interview the, witness virtually, whereas MRI, it sounded like they were gonna try to do all in-person interviews with maybe virtual follow-up, so that would be.
I got the other impression. I thought that MRI was going to do. My concern about MRI is that, as Don pointed out, is that it's a the person that is probably going to be doing the investigation. Like I wasn't quite sure who is actually going to be doing the investigation. He did mention that it'll probably be Sean, but it sounds like a relatively large organization. The more, if we're talking about an investigation, it would be great to have, it'd be great to have, an investigator who's actually working on it. And so I had a concern about it in a large organization, essentially in the business of doing investigations. Uh, I, I, I'm leaning toward, if of all three of them, well, I would have to agree with John. I'm leaning towards Paul first, and then MRI, and then Ms. Green, only because I think we'd rather have one investigator who's been doing this. And I'm not sure what we're actually gonna get with an organization like MRI. So I would have no problem with Paul. They both seem fine, but. Audience members have their hand up.
Janet Jensen does.
Sorry?
Janet Jensen.
Hi, Janet.
Uh,
Janet.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Now you
Yes,
can.
Can you hear me? Okay. Sorry, my connection's not so good. I just wanted to make one comment. I listened to the first two guys and I thought they were very good. But then when the woman came in, I just thought she added a whole another level of looking at the organization at a whole and trying to work things out, and as well as having the legal background. And it just seems like, yes, her price is higher, but without the travel time, and you know it, I'm not sure it is going to end up being that much different. And also, I just kind of have this idea that women are good at eliciting information from people. But anyway, that's just my comment. It just seemed like you discounted her pretty quickly.
No, I didn't, well, personally, I didn't, as, I did like what she had to say, and, but again, I think this is gonna take a lot of, this is gonna take a number of hours, I think a lot more than any of these investigators, believe. And so therefore, we do have, we do have a responsibility to the, to the, to the taxpayers. Um, it's less about the amount per hour. It's what happens is it just gives them a cap of, so they'll be able to do less investigation for the same amount of money. And I know I hate to talk about money when it comes to things like this, but it's literally double. And so it's very difficult to, to kind of square that circle. Um,
Yep. No, the I obviously don't really know the scope of the investigation, so I thought it was a relatively simple thing. So, you may be right. I just did really like her emphasis on kind of working things out and mediation and everything. But anyway.
she sounded good, and who knows? We may be hearing from her after all. Sorry, does Don have his hand up?
Wait a sec. Yes, I had a hand up. I have one concern for you to consider. Uh, Justin spoke about actually appointing one of these people. I think before you do that, you ought to touch base with your lawyer, because I think the lawyer is going to say one issue is who actually hires him, the lawyer or the select board. And the second thing he's going to say is that there ought to be a written contract. So if there's going to be a written contract, you wouldn't be appointing him. Rather, you would be indicating to the law firm a preference and then asking it how to proceed.
Point,
Thank you.
point taken. But I think it is, within, um, our purview now to choose someone, to go forward with, and then obviously consult the lawyer, and we can't have a terms of engagement or a contract until we, discuss scope of
Right, we
investigation.
have the right to, I mean, obviously, if we decide to engage somebody, I think engage is probably the better word, or engage their services, and they give us a scope of work that is untenable, then we certainly have the right to, not to engage them. And then we go on to the other ones. So this is not necessarily a done deal. I think what Justin's wants to establish now is who's the first person that we're going to, in this organization, that we're going to get this scope from. And if it checks out that we will engage them, or, we'll have to decide it.
One other suggestion is that when you meet with counsel, with counsel, write down the frame of instructions as to what you want investigated, because otherwise this thing may get totally out of hand if it's unclear. So you want a very clear statement of those items that are being investigated, what it's limited to.
Of
And I
course,
think
but
a lawyer could help with that.
we're certainly going to engage them, and that's one of the reasons why we asked them to give us their recommendations for investigators. So I have to believe that they have been down this road before, and we're gonna need a little, to make sure that we're gonna do this so that we do it as well as possible. So,
So it sounds like Steve and John's preference is Paul Italian.
I mean,
Right.
in general, In general, I think he would be my first choice. Um, uh, Again, I think, yeah, yeah, if I had to choose between an individual who's trained and an organization, that kind of, does, I would lean toward that individual for for a small town. Now, MRI might be very appropriate if we were a larger town where we needed multiple kind of boots on the ground type of thing. But I think the level of this investigation is also going to be kind of a level of, a certain amount of intimacy required to this, where you've got an investigator dealing with the individual town employees, and a lot of, I think it's been too much noise lately. I think so the fewer people that are actually doing the investigation is probably going to get a little bit of a more pure answer, what we're looking for. I'm just concerned if there's a large organization, a lot of different, faces and things like that, that it might add another layer of, you know. Oh, I'm sorry, Mickey has her hand up.
I've never seen, it's all right.
No,
I just was wondering, did anybody else, I thought I heard MRI Allen say something that there were 4 members, people on the staff? I heard something about 4 people.
I know Green said that she has a co-partner and then 3 other,
Yeah, she said that,
so that was 4 others.
but I have written down here something that 4 people, and I put a question mark on
Was
it.
that the police,
The MRI. MRI said it's a company and they would assign the appropriate staff member, and then said something about 4 people, because I have that in parentheses, and then he said something about Sean would probably interview.
I think maybe that was in the police services department of MRI, because MRI is a pretty large organization.
Okay,
But I think.
that's where the
if I
4 is,
recall, it might
okay,
have been 4 people in their police services.
okay.
Alright, well, I'd be, willing to go forward with Paul Italian and, tell Brian, the lawyer from KP Law, that we'd like to go forward with Paul and what our next steps.
Well, there has to be a vote, doesn't there? Has to be a motion, second, and a vote.
Yep, that's what we're, so, you wanna make a motion, Justin?
I'll motion, for the select board to engage, Paul Italian's, investigative services,
Upon approval of the scope of services.
yeah, upon, when, and our next step would be agreeing upon the scope of services with Paul Italian.
Okay, I can second that motion.
Roll call vote?
All. Why sitting in chair number 2? Justin Maycook.
Justin Maycook, yes.
John Weingold, yes.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We'll be reaching out to Paul, and just keep watching the skies. Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Say yes.
Yes.
Yes.